Cutting across right away to India's Rashrapati Bhawan, where the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is going to receive a ceremonial welcome. Remember, he is in the country. He arrived here on Sunday for a 6-day visit. Lots of optics on display already on your screens. As you can see, is the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, and other dignitaries. The Chief of Army Staff, General Bipin Rawat, also present. In a short while from now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will receive a ceremonial welcome at the President's house, that's the Rashrapati Bhawan. This is only the second time that an Israeli Prime Minister has visited India since diplomatic relations were established 25 years ago. Previously, it was Ariel Sharon who arrived in India in the year 2003. Incidentally, the BJP was in power at that time too. This time as well, it is a BJP government that is welcoming Prime Minister Netanyahu to India. It's a big story we'll be tracking all through Mr. Netanyahu's visit to India. Remember, there are a number of MOUs that are expected to be signed between both the countries. The operative part of the visit starts today. Although Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife Sarah arrived in India yesterday, they were received by the Indian Prime Minister in a break from protocol at the airport itself. Now, both prime ministers have described each other as true friends. The relationship rather warm. The optics, as I mentioned, on display for all to see. Prime Minister Modi receiving the Israeli Prime Minister with a bear hug at the airport, sending the shutterbugs into overdrive, of course. Since then, the Prime Minister hosted Mr. and Mrs. Netanyahu for a private dinner just yesterday. Now, today the Prime Minister is receiving a ceremonial welcome at the Rashrapati Bhawan. WION senior correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran joining me for more on that story. Ramesh, good morning. And of course, it's time for almost time for the Israeli Prime Minister to be welcomed at the Rashrapati Bhawan. Lots lined up for the Israeli Prime Minister's first day in terms of the operative part of his visit today.
Indeed. Good morning, Aisha. Just as you mentioned moments ago, today is the operative day of Prime Minister Netanyahu's 6-day visit to India, and we are standing by for the ceremonial reception in the forecourt of Rashrapati Bhawan. All the VIPs are in attendance. They are waiting for Prime Minister Netanyahu to arrive. His motorcade can be expected to reach Presidential Palace any moment now, followed by the other routine, regular engagements of Prime Minister Netanyahu. First to the Rajghat, where he will pay homage to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, followed by the delegation-level talks. First, a bilateral, followed by the delegation-level talks between the two respective delegations. A lunch hosted in honor of Prime Minister Netanyahu by the President of India, followed by a CEO forum meeting in the evening. And the last engagement will be a business summit, also to take place later in the evening today.
Right. Ramesh, does this visit take on even more significant tones following the UNSC vote as far as or rather the UNGA vote, I should say, regarding, the US President's decision to declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital and India's decision to not ratify that American decision?
Well, Aisha, in terms of optics, two developments have taken place in the last 3 odd weeks. First, India's decision to vote for the United Nations General Assembly resolution, which was critical of Israel and condemned the United States' decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And the second was India's decision to cancel the $500 million Spike anti-tank guided missile deal. And both would have come as a disappointment, no doubt, for the Israeli side. But all sources are telling us, especially from the Israeli side, including the ambassador, Daniel Carman, that India-Israel relationship is an all-weather relationship and that both sides would like to put all of this behind them and look forward to the next 25 years, as it were, in the relationship. Remember, they're celebrating the 25 years of diplomatic ties this year, and both leaders expect to have a forward-looking agenda going forward, especially in terms of critical areas of importance to India in particular: agriculture, innovation, water conservation, in addition to defense and security.
Absolutely. And of course, the best way, I suppose, to put difficult things behind you is through business. And there is a 130-member business delegation that is accompanying Prime Minister Netanyahu. So business top and center of this 6-day visit.
Indeed, Aisha. Now, we've seen when it comes to India-Israel ties, they enjoy a good government-to-government relation, but that does not seem to have percolated down as much as they would have wanted it to the private sector participation of their companies, people-to-people ties. So in this visit, sources are telling us that both Prime Ministers Netanyahu and Modi will look to intensify, strengthen the people-to-people cooperation, especially in terms of trade investments, culture, tourism, and Bollywood, no doubt.
Absolutely. Bollywood also figuring in the conversation. Surprisingly, Prime Minister Netanyahu will be in Mumbai and will be visiting or meeting rather with some Bollywood stars. Can I also ask you though, Ramesh, we've seen the Indian Prime Minister make a huge outreach to the Indian diaspora, no matter where he's travelled in the last year, or I should say 3 years or so. And that was true even when he went to Israel, even though the community of Indians in Israel, and of course Indian Jews specifically, is rather small. Do you think that's a factor that is also key to the conversations and key to the sort of relationship that is developing between India and Israel?
Well, actually, if you look at the overarching relationship between India and Israel, India is among those few countries which do not have a historical baggage when it comes to Israel. And that fact is appreciated and recognized by the Israelis, right down from Prime Minister Netanyahu down to the lowest official bureaucrat in their government. And that, to my mind, will hold both countries in good stead going forward. And Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular says that India is the first democracy which he sees when he gets up in the morning and turns right. He sees India as the first democracy, and when Prime Minister Modi turns left and sees Israel as the first democracy in West Asia, he says there are complementarities, convergences between both countries, and this can be harnessed in the days ahead, especially in terms of two critical areas of importance to India in particular. And Prime Minister Modi, by virtue of having held the position of Chief Minister of Gujarat, was taken in every time he visited Israel by Israel's advancements in the areas of agriculture and water. And these two areas can be expected to figure prominently in their delegation level talks later this afternoon.
Well, the confluence is also quite apparent in terms of the Twitter commentary that both Prime Ministers have engaged in ever since Prime Minister Netanyahu arrived. Can I also ask you very quickly, Ramesh, although visuals right now are telling us that we should expect seeing the Israeli Prime Minister in a short time from now, but before that, is this an interesting time in terms of India's foreign policy as well, Ramesh? We've seen a definite pivot toward Israel in the last 3.5-4 years. However, the commitment to Palestine notwithstanding, and the Prime Minister is going to be visiting Palestine later on. Is it an interesting time given that India has committed itself to de-hyphenating Israel and Palestine?
Very interesting question, Aisha, and this question has been agitating many a mind here in India and around the world. What would India's foreign policy be like going forward vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine, Iran in the Persian Gulf, and also the wider Arab world? And sources in the Indian Foreign Ministry are telling WION that, as you mentioned the word de-hyphenation, India's relationship or engagements with Israel and Palestine have been de-hyphenated for some time now, especially under Prime Minister Modi. And that, to my mind, will allow India to pursue the relations with both countries independent of each other.
Absolutely. Ramesh, stay with me. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has arrived at the Rashrapati Bhawan, and he is now receiving his ceremonial welcome to India. All right, that is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has just received a ceremonial reception at India's Rashrapati Bhawan, the official residence of the President of India. Prime Minister Netanyahu then being welcomed by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is the second day of Mr. Netanyahu's visit to India, but the operative part of his visit only starting today. My colleague Ramesh Ramachandran just took us through some of the significant parts of today's itinerary. There will be a bilateral. There will also be a lunch with the President of India, Ramnath Kovind, a little later on in the day. But for now, the Prime Minister being welcomed by a delegation at India's President's residence, the Rashrapati Bhawan. The Prime Minister will also be going to Rajghat a little while from now to pay his respects to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. This is the first visit by an Israeli Prime Minister to India since 2003. The last time an Israeli Prime Minister visited, it was Ariel Sharon. Interestingly, the BJP in power at that time too. The Chief of Army Staff, General Bipin Rawat, among the dignitaries gathered this morning to welcome the Israeli Prime Minister to India. Along with Mr. Netanyahu on this trip is a 130-member delegation, including the head of the Rafael Advanced Defense Systems. Remember, this is a key factor to keep in mind because the very same Rafael systems lost the $500 million deal to purchase the Spike anti-tank guided missiles in November. There is expected to be conversation on that deal during the 6-day visit by the Israeli Prime Minister. This also comes at a time when India chose to vote against the United States' decision to declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Remember, India is one of Israel's biggest arms market. India purchases close to $1 billion worth of weapons from Israel on an annual basis.
Madam, Honorable Prime Minister, what is your expectation from this visit?
This is a dawn of a new era in the great friendship between India and Israel. It began with Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to Israel, which created tremendous enthusiasm. It continues with my visit here, which I must say is deeply moving for my wife and me and for the entire people of Israel. And I think it heralds a flourishing of our partnership to bring prosperity and peace and progress for both our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
תקשורת, בואו נרוץ לרכבים.
Right, that is the Israeli Prime Minister who just addressed a very quick question from the press when asked about his expectations from the visit. He simply said that this is the dawn of a new era in terms of the relationship between India and Israel. He said that Mr. Modi's visit last year to Israel was historic and it created great enthusiasm, something that he sees carrying through on his visit to India. This time around, he said that the visit is deeply moving for both himself and his wife Sarah, and that he hopes for peace and progress for both the peoples of India and Israel. Now, there are deals and joint investments in areas expected to be announced. These are a whole gamut ranging from defense to renewable energy. That is going to be some of the key points of discussion. The Chief of Naval Staff, Chief of Army Staff there on your screens right now among the dignitaries in attendance at this ceremonial reception for the Israeli Prime Minister on day 2 of his visit to India. But day 1 in terms of the operative part of this historic visit, only the second one by an Israeli Prime Minister since 2003. Now, Mr. Netanyahu will be calling on President Ramnath Kovind. He'll be holding bilateral meetings with Prime Minister Modi. On Tuesday, he'll be visiting the Taj Mahal in Agra and then attend the Raisina Dialogue, which is a 3-day annual geopolitical conference. Let me go across to WION's senior international correspondent, Ramesh Ramachandran, with us on the broadcast this morning. Ramesh, quick statement by the Israeli Prime Minister, but really capturing pretty much the essence of this meeting, peace and progress for India and Israel, and of course calling this a deeply moving visit for both him and his wife.
Indeed, Aisha, dawn of a new era, said Prime Minister Netanyahu there in his customary address to the media after the ceremonial reception in the forecourt of Rashrapati Bhawan. Interestingly, Aisha, in the last 4 years, we've seen at least 5 high-level visits between India and Israel, starting with the then President of India, Pranab Mukherjee's visit to Israel in 2015, followed by a reciprocal visit by President Rivlin of Israel in 2016, and then Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to Israel last year in the month of July, and now this reciprocal visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu to India, only the second time an Israeli premier has done so in the last 15 years, the first one being Ariel Sharon in 2003. Clearly, it sums up the symbolism and substance of the India-Israel relationship, especially in terms of cooperation in high security, in high technology areas, defense, cybersecurity, homeland security, and also the softer issues such as Bollywood, tourism, culture, people-to-people ties, in addition to trade and investments. Innovation is one issue which is high on the agenda of both Prime Ministers Modi and Netanyahu, and one can expect detailed discussions going forward later this afternoon between the two principals and also the private sectors when they meet for the CEO forum, followed by the business summit later in the evening.
Absolutely, and of course a lot was made and continues to be made, Ramesh, about India's decision to not ratify President Trump's decision to declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And the reason I ask you that question is because there's been an attempt even by Prime Minister Netanyahu to put that factor aside. He's called the relationship between India and Israel a marriage made in heaven. He says that one UN vote can't destroy a relationship that is now 25 years old, at least diplomatically speaking. So clearly the agenda is forward-facing, it is forward-looking, and the focus is on collaboration more than anything else.
Absolutely, Aisha. India-Israel ties, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu and also the Israeli ambassador to India, Daniel Carman, there is more to the ties than just one UN vote by India. Clearly, the ambassador was at great pains to impress upon the media that the India-Israel ties is an all-weather relationship. It can withstand disappointments, divergences, differences, but at the end of the day, India-Israel know each other so well that they can carry on the conversation from they left off. So it might at best come as a disappointment for Israel that India voted for the UNGA resolution against Israel and also the cancellation of the $500 million Spike anti-tank guided missile deal. But we're given to understand that its talks are not over just yet, that both sides are expected and are keen to clinch the deal going forward, especially if possible between a government-to-government deal like India did in the case of buying a Rafale aircraft from France. So it is very much on the table and both sides can be expected to hold talks going forward. The other big issues on the agenda, Aisha, would be innovation, as I said. Prime Ministers Modi and Netanyahu will travel to Ahmedabad on the 17th, that is day after tomorrow, where he will visit the innovation hub in Ahmedabad and visit the iCreate company, which has Israeli innovation and participation for many years now. So innovation is key. The other issue is a free trade agreement, and we're given to understand that next month, soon after Prime Minister Netanyahu concludes his visit, India and Israel will resume talks on discussing or negotiating the FTA. The other issues would be agriculture and water, of course, both issues of key importance to India and very close to Prime Minister Modi's heart.
Absolutely. But Ramesh, it all looks rather rosy, right at the start of this visit. But some commentary that is being generated in Israel as well. I'm referring to a particular article written in Haaretz, which is, one of a rather liberal Israeli paper. And there is, a provocative headline that they used earlier to describe this relationship, saying that it isn't a serious relationship, it's more of an affair. Do you think that that is something that one needs to keep in mind, especially given that India does have a rather old and strong relationship with Palestine as well, and there is a balancing act that needs to be done by India, perhaps demonstrated best in its decision not to abstain in that vote, but choosing to actually stand by Palestine?
Well, Aisha, if you ask me, I would compartmentalize or divide India-Israel relationship, historically speaking, into three different phases. The first extended from 48 till about 1992, when India and Israel decided to establish formal diplomatic ties. So that was the key year in 1992 when the relationship came out in the open, as it were. But that said, defense and other ties remained very much under the radar, so to speak, in the last 25 years. And to borrow the word which you used, affair, this was, many commentators have said, described India-Israel ties as an affair which nobody wants to talk about and keep it, hidden from public view. But we're given to understand that finally there is so much maturity in the ties that India-Israel can finally talk about the relationship openly in public spaces, in public fora, and take the relationship forward to the next highest level. And innovation, defense, security, agriculture, water, all will play a key role, a key factor in deepening and intensifying these bilateral ties.
Absolutely. A veritable love affair coming out into the open, clearly. We leave it at that. Ramesh Ramachandran, thanks very much for joining us this morning and sharing your perspective with us on that. A story we'll be keeping our eye on, of course, as the visit continues. But for those of you who missed out on the action in New Delhi, don't worry. Twitter has you covered. An active social media presence has been one of the hallmarks of diplomatic engagements between India and Israel. And today was no different. Take a look.
This is how the first day of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu looked like, in case you were following the day's events through your Twitter feed. Twitteratis saw it all. The warm hug between the two leaders, to some somber ceremony at Teen Murti Chowk, where the two leaders paid homage to Indian soldiers who fought to liberate Haifa. There was also an element of personal touch by both leaders to the Twitter diplomacy. And Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his thanks for the warm welcome in Hindi. In the run-up to the visit, some citizens of Delhi took over the Israeli embassy's Twitter feed to welcome Prime Minister Netanyahu. Bureau Report, WION.